From rock bottom to redemption. A bingo recovery story. I never thought I'd be standing here today telling you this story. My name is Margaret, and 3 years ago, I was a completely different person. I was a woman who had everything. A loving husband named David, a beautiful home on Maple Street, 2 wonderful children, Emma and Michael, and a family that gathered every Sunday for dinner at my mother's house. I had a life that many would envy, but I threw it all away for the false promise of easy money and the intoxicating rush of gambling. It started innocently enough. The Sacred Heart Community Center had opened a new bingo hall, and my friend Patricia convinced me to join her one evening. "Come on, Margaret," she said with that persuasive smile of hers. "It's just for fun. A few dollars here and there, and we get to spend time together." I remember walking into that hall for the first time, seeing the rows of tables filled with eager faces, hearing the caller's voice echo through the room, and feeling something I hadn't felt in years: excitement. The first few months were exactly what Patricia had promised. We'd go once a week, spend maybe $20 or $30, laugh with the other players, and occasionally win enough to cover our coffee and donuts afterward. It was social, it was harmless, and it gave me something to look forward to. David would tease me about my bingo nights, and the kids would ask if I'd won anything when I came home. Life was still normal then, still balanced, but addiction is a cunning disease, and it crept into my life so gradually that I didn't notice the changes until it was too late. The once-a-week visits became twice a week, then 3 times. The $20 budget became $50, then $100. I started going to different halls around the city, chasing bigger jackpots and longer sessions. I told myself I was just having a streak of bad luck, that my big win was just around the corner. The first major red flag should have been when I started lying to David about where I was going. Instead of saying I was going to bingo, I'd tell him I was meeting Patricia for dinner or going to the grocery store. I'd come home with a bag of random items I didn't need, just to support my cover story. The lies became more elaborate, more frequent, and more necessary as my gambling increased. I remember the night I first dipped into our savings account. We had been putting money aside for Emma's college fund, and I convinced myself I was just borrowing it. I'd win it back, I told myself, and put it back before anyone noticed. But I didn't win it back. I lost it all, and then I lost more. The college fund disappeared, then our emergency savings, then the money we'd set aside for a new roof. David started noticing the financial discrepancies about 6 months into my serious gambling. He'd ask about missing money, about unusual charges on our credit cards, about why certain bills weren't being paid on time. I became a master of creative accounting, moving money between accounts, making minimum payments, and finding new sources of credit to keep the house of cards from falling down. The children began to suffer too, though they didn't understand why at the time. Emma needed new clothes for school, but I'd tell her we had to wait until next month. Michael wanted to join the soccer team, but I'd say we couldn't afford the registration fee. Meanwhile, I was spending hundreds of dollars a week at various bingo halls, chasing losses that kept growing larger and larger. My relationship with my family started deteriorating as well. My mother would invite us for Sunday dinners, but I'd often make excuses not to go because the big jackpot games were on Sunday evenings. When I did attend family gatherings, I was distracted, checking my phone for bingo schedules, calculating how much money I could afford to spend that week. My sister Jennifer started making comments about how I seemed different, how I wasn't really present anymore. The addiction consumed my thoughts completely. I'd wake up in the morning thinking about which hall I'd visit that day, which games offered the best odds, which callers seemed to be lucky for me. I'd plan my entire day around bingo schedules, neglecting household responsibilities, avoiding social commitments that didn't involve gambling, and isolating myself from anyone who might question my behavior. Then came the day that changed everything. The day my family discovered the full extent of my gambling problem. David had been growing suspicious of our mounting financial problems, and he decided to do some investigating of his own. He found the credit card statements I'd been hiding, the loan applications I'd submitted without his knowledge, and the notices from the bank about our overdrawn accounts. The confrontation was devastating. David sat me down at our kitchen table with a stack of papers in front of him, his face a mixture of anger, hurt, and disbelief. "Margaret," he said, his voice shaking, "we're losing our house. We're $30,000 in debt, and I just found out you've been gambling away our children's future." The words hit me like a physical blow, but even then my first thought wasn't about the pain I'd caused. It was about whether I'd be able to get to the evening session at St. Mary's Hall. That night, David asked me to choose between gambling and our family. In my diseased mind, clouded by addiction, I actually hesitated. The thought of giving up bingo, of never feeling that rush again, of accepting that I'd never win back what I'd lost. It terrified me more than the thought of losing my family. That hesitation was all David needed to see. He took the children and went to stay with his brother, leaving me alone in a house that was about to be foreclosed upon. The next few weeks were a blur of desperate attempts to win back what I'd lost. Without David's income to stabilize our finances, I had nothing to lose. So I risked everything. I sold my wedding ring, my jewelry, our television, and finally, the piece of furniture that represented the last shred of dignity I had left. Our family sofa. It was the couch where we'd watched movies together, where I'd read bedtime stories to the children, where David and I had planned our future. I sold it to a stranger for $300 and lost every penny of it that same night. When my mother found out what I'd done, she made the most painful decision of her life. She called me and said, "Margaret, I love you, but I can't watch you destroy yourself anymore. Until you get help, you're not welcome in this family." My sister Jennifer agreed, and suddenly, I was completely alone. No husband, no children, no parents, no siblings, just me and my addiction. The house went into foreclosure, and I moved into a tiny studio apartment in the worst part of town. I had lost my car in the divorce proceedings, so I walked everywhere or took public transportation. I lived on cheap food and spent every available dollar on bingo. I was hitting rock bottom, but I couldn't see it yet. I thought I was just having a particularly bad streak, that my luck would change if I just kept playing. The final wake-up call came on a cold Tuesday night in February. I was at a seedy bingo hall on the outskirts of town, playing with my last $20. I hadn't eaten a proper meal in 2 days. My electricity had been shut off, and I was facing eviction from my apartment. But I was convinced that this was going to be my night, that I was going to win the jackpot that would solve all my problems. I didn't win. I lost that $20, and with it, any illusion I had left about gambling being the solution to my problems. I sat in that empty hall after everyone had gone home, crying uncontrollably, finally seeing the full extent of the destruction I'd caused. I had lost everything. My family, my home, my dignity, my future, and I had nothing to show for it except a pile of debt and a crushing sense of shame. That's when I met Father Thomas. I had been attending Sacred Heart Church sporadically throughout my gambling years, mostly out of guilt and habit, rather than any real spiritual connection. But that Wednesday morning after my final loss, I found myself walking through the church doors, not knowing where else to go. I sat in the back pew, crying quietly, trying to figure out how I'd let my life spiral so completely out of control. Father Thomas was a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor that made him approachable, Even to someone as broken as I was, he noticed me sitting there and came over, not with judgment or condemnation, but with genuine concern. "Are you all right, my child?" he asked, sitting down beside me. I couldn't hold back anymore. I told him everything. About the gambling, about losing my family, about selling our furniture, about being cut off from everyone I loved. I expected him to lecture me about sin and redemption, but instead he listened with patience and compassion that I didn't feel I deserved. When I finished my story, Father Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key. "Margaret," he said, "I want you to have this. It's the key to our church's community kitchen. For the past 5 years, we've been trying to find someone to coordinate our meal program for the homeless and struggling families in our neighborhood. The position doesn't pay much, but it comes with a small apartment above the kitchen, and it would give you a place to start rebuilding your life." I stared at the key in my hand, feeling its weight both literally and symbolically. "Why would you trust me with this?" I asked. "I've proven I can't be trusted with anything," Father Thomas smiled. "Because I don't see someone who can't be trusted. I see someone who's lost her way but still has the capacity to find it again. This community needs someone who understands struggle, someone who knows what it's like to be broken. Your experience with addiction doesn't disqualify you from helping others. It might be exactly what qualifies you." That conversation changed the trajectory of my life. I moved into the small apartment above the community kitchen the following week, and I threw myself into the work of feeding and caring for others. At first, it was just a way to keep busy, to avoid the temptation of gambling halls and to earn enough money to survive. But gradually, it became something much more meaningful, working with the homeless population and struggling families in our neighborhood. I met people whose stories were similar to mine in many ways. There was Sandra, a single mother who had lost her job and was living in her car with her 2 young children. There was Robert, a veteran who had turned to drugs after coming home from Afghanistan and had lost his family and his home. There was Maria, an elderly woman who had been caring for her disabled husband until his medical bills bankrupted them both. Each of these people had a story of loss, of hitting rock bottom, of feeling abandoned by the world. But they also had stories of resilience, of small victories, of finding hope in the darkest places. Listening to their stories and helping them navigate their challenges gave me perspective on my own situation. I began to understand that my addiction wasn't a moral failing. It was a disease that required treatment, understanding, and ongoing support. Father Thomas connected me with a gambling addiction support group that met at the church every Thursday evening. Walking into that first meeting was terrifying. I had to admit publicly that I was a gambling addict, that I had lost everything because of my addiction, and that I needed help. But I also found something I hadn't expected: a community of people who understood exactly what I was going through. There was James, a businessman who had lost his company and his marriage to poker addiction. There was Carol, a retired teacher who had gambled away her pension at the casino. There was Miguel, a young father who had gotten hooked on online gambling and nearly lost his family. Each of us had a different story, but we all shared the same struggle with addiction and the same desire to rebuild our lives. The support group became my lifeline. We met every week, sharing our challenges, celebrating our victories, and holding each other accountable. I learned coping strategies for dealing with the urge to gamble, techniques for managing stress and anxiety, and ways to rebuild trust with the people I had hurt. Most importantly, I learned that recovery was possible, but it required daily commitment and ongoing support. As I became more stable in my recovery, I began to excel in my work at the community kitchen. What had started as a basic food service program evolved into a comprehensive support center for struggling families. I implemented new programs for job training, financial literacy, and addiction recovery. I partnered with local businesses to create employment opportunities for people transitioning out of homelessness. I developed relationships with social service agencies to help families access health care, housing assistance, and childcare. The work was challenging, but it was also deeply rewarding. Every day I saw people who were facing the same kinds of struggles I had faced, and I was able to offer them hope and practical support. I realized that my experience with addiction, as painful as it had been, had given me unique insights into the challenges facing vulnerable populations. I could connect with people in a way that others couldn't, because I had been where they were. About 18 months into my recovery, I received an unexpected phone call from my sister Jennifer. She had been watching my progress from a distance, hearing updates from Father Thomas and some mutual friends about the work I was doing at the community kitchen. "Margaret," she said, "I've been thinking about what you've accomplished, and I'm proud of you. Would you like to have coffee sometime and talk?" That coffee meeting was the beginning of rebuilding my relationship with my family. Jennifer told me that while they had all been hurt by my actions during my gambling years, they had also been waiting for signs that I was truly committed to recovery. The work I was doing at the community kitchen, the stability I had maintained, and the positive changes they could see in me convinced them that I was ready to begin healing the relationships I had damaged. The process of rebuilding trust with my family was slow and sometimes painful. There were difficult conversations about the hurt I had caused, the consequences of my actions, and the long road ahead. My mother admitted that cutting me off had been one of the hardest things she'd ever done, but she believed it had been necessary to motivate me to seek help. My children, now teenagers, had questions about why I had chosen gambling over them, and they needed time to process their own feelings about my addiction. But gradually, step by step, we began to rebuild our relationships. I attended family dinners again, though I had to earn my place back at the table through consistent actions rather than just words. I started spending time with Emma and Michael individually, learning about who they had become during the years when I was consumed by my addiction. I began to understand the impact my choices had had on them, and to work on making amends for the pain I had caused. The most difficult relationship to repair was with David. Our marriage had been legally dissolved, and he had moved on with his life in many ways. But as the co-parent of our children, we needed to find a way to work together effectively. Initially, our interactions were tense and awkward, filled with unspoken hurt and resentment. But as he saw the changes in me and the stability I had achieved, he began to soften his stance. One evening, about 2 years into my recovery, David asked if we could have dinner together to talk about our children's future. Over the course of that conversation, he told me something that surprised me. "Margaret," he said, "I never stopped loving you, even when I had to leave. I left because I loved you too much to watch you destroy yourself. But I always hoped that someday you'd find your way back to the person I fell in love with." That conversation opened the door to exploring whether we could rebuild our marriage. It wasn't a simple process. We both had changed during our time apart, and we needed to learn how to trust each other again. We started with counseling, both individually and together, working through the pain and trauma of my addiction years. We took things slowly, dating again like we had when we first met, rebuilding our connection step by step. Meanwhile, my work at the community kitchen was gaining recognition throughout the city. The program had grown from serving 50 meals a week to serving over 300, and we had helped dozens of families transition out of homelessness and into stable housing. Local news outlets started covering our work, and I was invited to speak at conferences about addiction recovery and community service. The recognition felt good, but it also felt surreal. Just a few years earlier, I'd been sitting in a seedy bingo hall, spending my last $20 while my life fell apart around me. Now I was being recognized as a community leader, someone who was making a real difference in people's lives. The transformation was so complete that sometimes I had to remind myself that it was really my story. One of the most meaningful moments in my recovery came when I was asked to speak at a fundraising event for gambling addiction treatment programs. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of community leaders, healthcare professionals, and people in recovery, I realized how far I had come. I told my story honestly, including the darkest moments and the deepest shame. But I also shared the hope and redemption that had followed. After my speech, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. She told me that she was currently struggling with gambling addiction, and that hearing my story had given her hope that recovery was possible. We talked for over an hour, and I was able to connect her with resources for treatment and support. Later, I learned that she had entered a treatment program and was working on rebuilding her life. That encounter reminded me of something Father Thomas had told me when he first gave me the key to the community kitchen. Your experience with addiction doesn't disqualify you from helping others. It might be exactly what qualifies you. I realized that my journey through addiction and recovery had given me a unique ability to connect with people who were struggling, to offer them hope based on lived experience rather than just theoretical knowledge. As I continued to work in the community and rebuild my relationships with my family, I also began to consider what the future might hold. David and I had been working on our marriage for over a year, and we were both feeling ready to take the next step. On a quiet Sunday evening, as we sat together in the apartment above the community kitchen, he asked me a question that I never thought I'd hear again. "Margaret, would you like to come home?" Moving back into our family home was both joyful and challenging. The house held so many memories, both good and painful, and I had to learn how to live there again as a different person. Emma and Michael, now young adults, had to adjust to having their mother back in their daily lives. David and I had to navigate the complexities of rebuilding our marriage, while also maintaining the individual growth we had each achieved during our time apart. But with patience, communication, and ongoing support from our counselors and support groups, we made it work. We established new routines, new traditions, and new ways of connecting with each other. We also made sure to maintain the lessons we had learned during our separation about the importance of honesty, communication, and mutual support. My work at the community kitchen continued to flourish, and I was eventually promoted to director of the entire community outreach program for Sacred Heart Church. The position came with increased responsibilities and a much better salary, allowing me to start rebuilding my financial stability. I was able to start saving money again, contributing to a retirement account, and even beginning to set aside funds for my children's future education. But the most important change wasn't financial. It was spiritual and emotional. I had rediscovered my sense of purpose, my connection to community, and my ability to make a positive difference in the world. The work I was doing felt meaningful in a way that nothing in my previous life had. I was using my experience with struggle and recovery to help others, and I was building genuine relationships with people who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. One evening, as I was closing up the community kitchen after a particularly busy day, Father Thomas stopped by to check on me. We sat together in the quiet dining room, surrounded by the evidence of the day's work: empty serving dishes, clean tables, and the lingering aroma of the meal we had served to over 200 people. "You know," he said, "when I gave you that key 3 years ago, I hoped it would help you find your way back to yourself. But I never imagined you'd transform this program the way you have. You've not only rebuilt your own life, you've helped rebuild the lives of countless others." I looked at the key I still carried on my keychain, the same key he had given me when I was at my lowest point. "Father Thomas," I said, "when you gave me this key, you told me to start here. I thought you meant start working here, start serving others here. But I realize now that you meant something deeper. You meant start healing here, start rebuilding here, start believing in possibility here." He smiled. "Sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the simplest acts of service. You came here broken, but you didn't stay broken. You used your brokenness as a foundation for building something beautiful." As I reflect on my journey from addiction to recovery, from isolation to community, from despair to hope, I'm amazed by the power of human resilience and the importance of having people who believe in us, even when we can't believe in ourselves. Father Thomas saw potential in me when I couldn't see it myself. The members of my support group held me accountable and encouraged me when I wanted to give up. My family eventually found the strength to forgive and welcome me back into their lives. But I also learned that recovery is not a destination. It's an ongoing journey. I still attend my support group meetings every week, even though I've been gambling free for over 3 years. I still work with a counselor to address the underlying issues that contributed to my addiction. I still take each day one at a time, making conscious choices to prioritize my recovery and my relationships. The temptation to gamble occasionally resurfaces, especially during stressful periods or when I'm feeling particularly vulnerable. But I've developed healthy coping mechanisms and a strong support system that helps me navigate those challenges. I've learned to recognize the warning signs of addictive thinking and to reach out for help before I reach a crisis point. Today I'm proud of the life I've rebuilt. My marriage with David is stronger than it was before my addiction, built on a foundation of honesty, mutual respect, and shared commitment to growth. My relationships with my children have been repaired, and I'm actively involved in their lives as they pursue their own dreams and goals. My relationship with my extended family has been restored, and we've created new traditions and memories together. Professionally, I've found work that aligns with my values and gives me a sense of purpose. The Community Kitchen program has expanded to serve over 500 meals per week, and we've helped more than 200 families transition out of homelessness. I've been recognized by the City Council for my contributions to community service, and I've been invited to serve on several boards and committees focused on addiction recovery and poverty reduction. But the most meaningful recognition comes from the people whose lives have been touched by the work we do. Like Sandra, the single mother who was living in her car when I first met her, and who now has stable housing and a full-time job. Like Robert, the veteran who has been clean and sober for 2 years and has reconnected with his estranged children. Like Maria, the elderly woman who now volunteers at the community kitchen and has become one of my closest friends. Each of these stories reminds me that recovery is possible, that people can change, and that second chances are real. My own story is proof that it's never too late to turn your life around, no matter how far you've fallen or how much you've lost. As I stand here today, telling you this story, I'm not the same person who walked into that bingo hall for the first time 4 years ago. I'm not the same person who sold her family's furniture to feed her addiction. I'm not the same person who sat crying in an empty bingo hall, having lost everything that mattered to her. I'm someone who learned that hitting rock bottom can be the foundation for building something beautiful. I'm someone who discovered that addiction doesn't define you. Your response to it does. I'm someone who found that the greatest victories come not from avoiding struggle, but from learning how to transform struggle into strength. And I'm someone who knows that none of this would have been possible without the people who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself, who saw potential in me when I could only see failure, and who offered me hope when I thought there was none left. If you're struggling with addiction, if you've lost everything that matters to you, if you're sitting in your own version of that empty bingo hall, wondering how you'll ever find your way back, I want you to know that recovery is possible. It's not easy, and it's not quick, but it's possible. It starts with reaching out for help, with accepting support from others, and with believing that you deserve a better life. And sometimes it starts with something as simple as a key, and a voice saying, "Start here." The key Father Thomas gave me that day wasn't just a key to a community kitchen. It was a key to a new life, a new purpose, and a new understanding of what it means to be human. It was the key to discovering that our greatest failures can become our greatest strengths, that our deepest pain can become our greatest source of compassion, and that our most broken moments can become the foundation for our most beautiful transformations. Today, I carry that key with me everywhere I go, not because I need it to unlock doors, but because it reminds me of the power of second chances, the importance of community, and the endless possibilities that exist when we choose hope over despair. My name is Margaret, and this is my story of recovery, redemption, and the incredible journey from rock bottom to a life beyond my wildest dreams.